fraternity prank. Also, the Pope decided today to release Vatican-related bath products. An incredible thing. Yes, it's the new Pope on a rope. It's right, Pope on a rope. Wash with it, go straight to heaven. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Bill Roach. This is another episode of Timeless Dialogues. And today we are going to look at an important article that talks about the role of diversity, equity, and inclusion within the Southern Baptist Convention. Now, what I want you to realize is that this article is really just a microcosm of what's going on within the broader evangelical world. Namely, we're starting to see these DEI programs under a variety of different names working their way into so many evangelical institutions. So what we're going to do is we're going to work our way through this article, and then we're going to look at a video in which we're going to see this illustrated. And what I want to do is I want to talk about the problem, but I actually want to show you the problem more. And I think the reason is that we can deal with the realm of theory, but when we get into the world of practice and see it with our very own eyes, it seemingly changes everything. Now, before we do that, what I want to do is I actually want to show you a little comical video that I found that illustrates our point. You know, one of the things that we've realized throughout really the last several months is the role of affirmative action within, just greater American life. And in many respects, what it's done is it's created this atmosphere of which people who are not qualified are given positions even though they don't always deserve them. And what's been picked up along that has been the diversity, equity, inclusion with a lot of qualifications in that. But I just found this little hilarious video that kind of deals with the two worlds that I live in, the world of academia and the world of martial arts, to illustrate it. So with no further ado, I want to show this to you.
You want a single leg? What do you want?
Dude, I'll do whatever I want.
Just affirmative action. Get a takedown.
And I cannot tell you how many times I watched and laughed at that video. Oh, get the takedown. We believe in affirmative action down here. But if you think about it, that's a great application of what affirmative action has actually been. The guy's not getting the takedown. They're giving it to him and scoring it as a takedown. So here's what I want you to do real quick. Pay attention. One more second here. Look at this. I want you to watch it again because I think it was just that funny.
You want a single leg? What do you want?
Dude, I'll do whatever I want.
Just affirmative action. Get a takedown.
So what we're going to do here is we are going to transition and we're going to dive right into our topic here. So what I want us to think about as we start to think about this whole diversity, equity, and inclusion and, the wokeness and the social justice and all that it's brought about is that underlying so much of this theory, so much of this movement are these, what we would call linguistic manipulations. Now, we all know how linguistic manipulations work, is that they take a language, they take something that's a feature of language, and they intentionally twist it for their purposes. And I think we, as within broader evangelical circles, we see this happening first and foremost with the cults. We realize that when you interact with a Mormon or a Jehovah's Witness, immediately you got to ask yourself, what do they mean by the word Jesus? Or what do they think actually happened if Jesus died on the cross? Or did he die on a cross or on a stake? What do they mean by, salvation? All these different concepts. We're used to that. Now, I think one area that a lot of evangelicals are not used to it is the way that all of society today seemingly does this. And part of the reason for that is that we live in a society driven by linguistic manipulations. One of the reasons for that is that we're just wholly cloaked in just the broad sort of mood of postmodernism, where we don't think that language has fixed and final meaning. We don't think that it actually latches on to the real world. We think that it's all a matter of opinion and interpretation. And we hear these things all the time. So, for example, somebody posts something, and let's just say it's religious, and we recognize like, oh, that might be an expression of theological liberalism. And how do people deal with it? Well, everybody gets their own opinion. Well, yeah, everybody could have their own little opinion, but it doesn't make your little opinion right. What makes something right is whether or not it actually corresponds with reality. So here's what we're going to find is that in many respects, these woke double speaks are to speak very clearly about it, to initiate us into a pseudo reality. And we recognize what pseudo realities are. They're false realities. And it's a reality that they want you to believe actually exists. Maybe it's the initial steps to their utopian vision of society, or maybe it's just the initiation language, as James Lindsay would talk about, like Hegel's second nature of man, which is the person that's coming into this heightened stage, or any of those types of things. But let's illustrate it here real quick. The pseudo reality sometimes, just in a vague sense, could be something like the world of the Matrix. We realize that the Matrix isn't real reality. It's a pseudo reality. It's a make-believe reality. It's a simulacrum of the reality that we know is actual reality. Well, in many respects, this is what the woke try to do to us, is they'll give words their meaning, but completely jettison them from what they normally mean. So, for example, when we look at things like diversity and equity and inclusion, we can realize that specifically like diversity, we're like, who doesn't want a variety of different people represented in a particular place? Aren't we as Americans part of this broader melting pot of experience? Or, the concept of inclusion. Don't we want everybody involved in something? Don't we want to, put every kid onto the team, give them a place that they can play, with the broader group of people, or equity? We want everything to be equal in this sense. You can even go look at forms of translations of the Bible and the word equity is in there. See, it's a biblical concept. The problem with it is that they're using the same words, but they're giving them completely different meanings. They're giving them pseudo reality meanings with their intended goals to accomplish. So let me give you sort of two different examples of this. So the first one that's become very popular is what's known as the Mott and Bailey fallacy, in which what it is it's a linguistic manipulation where you have a word that may be the same material word on the page, but they use it in two different ways. So the Bailey is the crazy thing that they're saying, or what they really want to do. And the Mott sounds like it, but it's like lesser, and it may actually be completely different. So for example, the Mott, the lesser, they'll walk in and they'll say things like this: "Your class today, we are trying to teach people about the different cultural statuses of what people might be experiencing in society." Whatever garbage they're going to say, pretty much just say, like, we want to have all different viewpoints represented, and we're going to teach you all how to understand opposing cultures. When the reality of it is what they're trying to say is that we're radically divided on critical consciousness versus uncritical consciousness. And we realize that within the American experiment, one of the best ways to make the divide of what we're trying to do is to insert a racial critical consciousness. So instead of turning people into understanding the different perspectives of blah, 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 what they're trying to actually do is they're trying to initiate you into critical consciousness. So what do? Instead of just, games of learning, it's, the classic example, we want to chain your kids up on the floor so they can understand what it's like to be slaves. And in doing so, we're going to, in many respects, teach them what oppression is like. We're not going to let them out of it. Now, here's what happens is that you say that, and then you get a bunch of angry moms that show up at the school board meeting that's like, "Hey, why'd you put my kid in chains?" But what are they going to do? They're going to say, "Well, we don't want to put kids in chains. What we're trying to do is teach them education." And the cycle goes on and on and on. They're taking two terms, two concepts that kind of are a little related, but they're so disrelated that they have no real overlap. That's the game. We play this, then we play that. We play this, then we play that. And the Bailey's giving them the crazy stuff that they really want, whereas the Mott is the more refined, nice approach to it. Now, the second one, before we get into this, just to give you examples, is one that's known as the Kafka trap. And this has been illustrated in a variety of areas. I'm not the first one to say this. You can find it in other videos. You can find it exemplified in Lindsay's book, Race Marxism, giving credit to whom credit is due. But what we find is that this whole approach tries to take innocent people who have questions and make them guilty people. So what they're going to do is they're going to create these kangaroo courts where if you ask a question or you admit some kind of ignorance or you talk about like you want evidence of racism somewhere, some shape or form, well, see, that just proves you're guilty. Because if you can't see that you're a racist, see, you are the real racist. And in the world we live in, we know you can't actually be a racist. And then they're going to use that as a way to start to exclude you, censor you, any kinds of things. And we see these linguistic manipulations happening all the time. So let's talk about the three big ones. We're going to talk about diversity, inclusion, and equity. So when we find this, we see that what's going on here is that when you look at the concept of diversity and we act like, oh, all this is we want everybody represented. But what this really means within understanding woke ideology, and you see this played out with a lot of people who finally picked up on this game, is that it means that they want to have people in the group, at the table, in the school, at your workplace, who are initiated in the core tenets and ideology of critical race theory. And what they're going to do is they want to talk about how we want to have diversity and diversity hires. It means we're only going to hire those people who actually are trained in CRT. It means that we are going to deal with people who are speaking with like the authentic voices of critical consciousness. So it's another way of saying we're not going to let you into the game unless we know that you already buy into the ideology of the game, namely the critical consciousness. And we've talked about this in other videos. It's this idea that you're actually seeing the reality that they want them to, this idea that the linguistic manipulations, you understand the lingo, you understand the pseudo reality, and they may actually think that's reality. But that's what we mean by diversity. So when we have a kingdom diversity, what it really means is that we're using the kingdom of God, whether it's, all tribes, all nations, everywhere, represented at one single place, to really say, we're really just going to hire people who meet our critical consciousness according to certain quotas and criterions and so forth. In other words, it functions sort of like, well, this.
You want a single leg? What do you want?
Dude, I'll do whatever I want.
Just affirmative action. Get a takedown.
Like we said, that's just a hilarious video. But again, it's the people who are not usually qualified on paper, but because they've bought into the language, they live into the pseudo reality, they understand the linguistic manipulations. So when the diversity coordinator is doing his little manipulations and people need to understand the wink, wink of what's going on, they know they're speaking the same language. So the second one, inclusion. Doesn't inclusion just mean we're going to have people in here that need to be represented? We want to be an inclusive group. We want our churches and our schools to represent the communities that we serve in and all the other garbage that they're giving. You notice the Mott and Bailey, the linguistic manipulations? But really what this is it ends up just being this massive justification for censorship and purging people who don't buy into the ideology that they have. So we're actually saying, we want to invite everybody to the table, except those people that are already at the table or who might want to come to the table who don't agree with our diversity initiatives, the critical consciousness initiatives. So what they're going to do is they're going to look at the effects of like power dynamics and exclusion. And they're going to say, these people who have power and this, you see how they've excluded everybody. But what it does is that if someone does something that, say, upholds one of these power dynamics, they question, is this really racist or do I really need to have this? Then that person is immediately sort of censored or their ideas are removed. Why? Because they're not fostering the inclusive society that we're trying to forge. Rather, what they're doing is they're upholding the power dynamic and they're upholding the hegemony of all these different concepts when what they're trying to do is they're actually trying to see who has bought into the diversity critical consciousness initiatives and the inclusion initiatives to say, well, you're not really inclusive enough. And, you might be an inherent racial bias and whatever garbage they're going to give you at that point in time. So the funny thing is that inclusion is actually exclusion. It's the exact opposite of what it means. It's a means of censoring somebody. And what it's usually used as a means of removing various people. So what if you hold an idea that they don't like? Well, maybe they'll put you through re-education training. But what if you, like as such, maybe your race or your maleness or whatever represents the hegemony or the power dynamic that they want to remove. Well, then they're just going to remove you. And this is specifically what we see here. And what this is that these are the two initiatives that are used to bring about equity. In many respects, these two are the hammer and nail to build the equity house that they're striving for. These are the means of really bringing about socialism. So what's the third term before we jump into this? Because I think this is all going to be very important for us to actually understanding the material that we're going to look at here. So what does equity mean? Doesn't equity mean everybody gets their fair share, or that we're all have the equal opportunity, or some kind of concept that justice and equal justice before the law, or everybody proverbially gets the same bowl of cereal, or some other concept? We can think of a million different things here. But what you have to really see is that equity in its proper, broadest sense is really just an idea of redistribution and reparations. Equality for this, or the concept of equality of access by the identity of one and for identity groups. So what it ends up being is this idea of manipulating things to have an equality of outcome. So what happens is it's not just everybody gets a fair shake at the education. Rather, everybody needs to reach the same. Well, inherently, we know, based off of a variety of things, from the very beginning, not everybody is going to be able to proverbially hit the ball and run the bases. So we start having these disparities. So what happens when they have disparities? Well, you got to use all of these other means at their power dynamic disposal to monkey with the system, to change the system, to play with the system in order to get this equality of outcome. So what they end up doing is that justice then requires for us to pay back for the inequalities, or to ensure that other people get more of a head start so they have an equal outcome at the end. So what equity ends up being is it ends up being this radical redistribution of resources from one group to another group with the goal of having some kind of equality of outcome when everything shakes out in the end. Well, what do we call this? Well, this could be equity as a form of Marxism. It could be equity as a form of socialism. It could be this idea of the socialist sort of component that's brought into it. And the way that they're going to work with this is the way to flip the script on all of this is diversity and inclusion are really the means of giving us racial socialism or societal socialism. Or another way to think of it is that diversity and equity and inclusion, the whole movement, but diversity and inclusion in particular, are the means by which they bring about the colonization of anti-racism and critical consciousness and buying into these initiatives and the linguistic manipulations for their end goal of equity, socialism, or race Marxism. Now, I'm not the first one to talk about this. This has been talked about in great detail. But what I'm finding is that when people are kind of just now getting the basics of it, that's when we need to talk about it again and again and again. Because what we have to see here is that what's going on within all of these different institutions is that they intentionally put in diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. Why? Because inherently they're selling it as, oh, we want to have representation, or we want all people to have a seat at the table. But we know that those terms don't actually mean that. By diversity, they mean people trained in critical ideology and the second consciousness concepts and Hegel's second theory of man and all these different concepts. Or by inclusion, they don't mean exclusion, because if you don't agree with it, they want you removed. And the end goal is socialism. It's classic socialistic Marxism, given the American racial bent. So what I want to do here, if you are still with me, is I want to transition this into another scene of which we are going to look here at an article that came out. And this article was put out here, just looking at it, that says over half of Southern Baptist universities have DEI infrastructure. So just think about what we just said. They have critical consciousness, inclusion, exclusion kind of concepts within their schools for the redistribution and socialism of all things. So notice what it says here. It says at least 27 of the 52 colleges associated with Southern Baptist Convention or one of its state conventions have some form of critical or of official diversity, equity, and inclusion infrastructure. Now, notice what it goes on to say here, and we're going to keep going through this. It says at least 27 of the 52 colleges associated with the Southern Baptist Convention have some form of diversity, equity, and inclusion infrastructure, according to the analysis by the Sentinel. 20 of the colleges have a chief diversity officer, vice president for diversity, or some other form of diversity director, liaison, coordinator, whatever we want to call it. 19 of the institutions have a DEI office, department, center, committee, or council. So just think about this. Whatever they want to call it, whatever name they label on it, it is the packaged form of DEI, everything that we just talked about. So let's show a couple of the ones that they're talking about here. It says, many of the colleges with DEI infrastructure have official statements on diversity or entire pages devoted to diversity on their website. Baylor University, Bluefield University, and Missouri Baptist University have dedicated bias reporting web pages where students, faculty, and staff can report incidences of related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Several of the other institutions had phone numbers or email addresses for their purposes. So let's just think about how this is actually going to function. So you have people that are brought in through these offices. They put out the literature on DEI. They start training students in it, which is like initiating them into the cult movement of wokeness. They're buying into the ideology of it, and now they're spotting it. And the second they spot it, then they have to go from theory to praxis. They have to go from buying into critical race theory into critical race praxis. And what does that mean? It means being an anti-racist. So now you have to start calling out instances of racism, and you have to use this new sort of given power to you within the institution because you have this diversity officer and they might be a vice president or something of the like. And you got to bring the proverbial hammer down on this person. They either had to be trained in critical consciousness, go through woke DEI trainings, or they have to be included, actually excluded from the institution because they're not living in an inclusive environment. Because the end goal is equity. The end goal is the redistribution of wealth, or it could be the idea of maybe reparations need to be given and so forth. So let's continue going on here. Now, Baylor, and we recognize Baylor's not a conservative institution. We would probably say, I expect Baylor to have this. But it goes on to say, Baylor is the only university examined by the Sentinel whose website contained the use of preferred pronouns. Several web pages profiling Baylor faculty, staff, and students include pronouns preferences such as she, her, or he, him. Wingate University, south of Charlotte, their chief diversity officer released an official statement expressing disappointment to the Supreme Court's decision to end racial preferences in college admissions. Quote, in this moment, it is essential that Wingate University speaks with a clear voice. We will continue to value and cultivate a diverse and interconnected campus community where everyone can thrive. While Wingate's admission process does not consider race, wink, wink, sure it still does, we continue to work hard to make our campus an ideal and highly coveted destination for individuals from diverse backgrounds. So, in other words,
You want a single leg? What do you want?
Dude, I'll do whatever I want.
Just affirmative action. Get a takedown.
guys, we just cannot stop showing that. It is too good. Chowan University offers a minor in diversity studies. So just think about this. You can get a minor from a Christian school, a school that claims to be following Christ and the Bible, that's going to train you in the ideology of critical race theory. And it's going to train you on how to only hire people that have been given the critical consciousness and who speak with authentic, critical, conscious voices and all the rest. And notice what it says. The program is composed of history courses, or the rewriting of history courses, for various minority groups in the United States, as well as criminal justice, psychology, English, and religion courses. So namely, the humanities department is completely wrecked by this field at this institution. And what's interesting is that with critical consciousness, what do you do when you have a fact, like a legit fact in the classic sense of the term, that doesn't fit with the agenda? Well, it doesn't really matter because everything has to be either interpreted or reinterpreted according to ideology, according to critical consciousness. You're not the old man anymore. You're the new man. And you got to read everything like the new man. So it doesn't matter if the 1619 project is factually bogus and completely, utterly wrong on so many of the things that it brings to the table. Why? Because you have to read it according to the new man, the new consciousness, the new diversity initiative that's been given to you. Because remember, diversity in so many respects is the recognition that you are living in the pseudo reality, that you're living with the critical consciousness. Now, let's look here. Many of the Southern Baptist Convention colleges that do not have official DEI infrastructures have other ways of showing that the ideology, which posits that diversity on the basis of characteristics such as race and sex are positive goods or high priorities on their campus. Several of them list diversity, equity, and inclusion in their mission statements or their university values. Others have diversity symposiums, lectures, discussion groups, scholarships, or future plans to implement diversity initiatives. In many respects, it's sort of like they're doing things along the line. I actually don't even have the book here. Rules for radicals, but these are rules for critical race theory radicals, in which they create little subgroup of radicalized people who are being initiated into critical consciousness, and they're going to give money for it. They're going to have discussion groups. They're going to have whole lectures, symposiums, and the like going on in Southern Baptist institutions. So notice the other thing that they're saying here. Some of them are very explicit about it. They tell you point blank, this is what you're going to get, kid. You're going to get it straightforward, critical race theory. Others, they don't have it on there, but notice they're doing critical race theory, critical race practice, because in many respects, it's like critical race theory and critical race practice are two hands of the same person, or we could say it's the hand and the glove being put together. Like you kind of have to do them in sync with one another. And what happens is that when you see these manipulations taking place and you understand these manipulations taking place, like somebody's like, oh, what do you mean by woke? We don't understand what woke means. They totally know what woke means, but they're playing the linguistic manipulations. Because if you can spend all of your time debating the definitions of words, well, guess what they can do? When you have frenzy this way, they just run the ball straight in. It's sort of like when you're looking at a football game. If you create a little chaos on this part of the field, you can throw the ball to the other side of the field and completely, utterly win the game. So let's continue looking here. It says this. At least 3 of the Southern Baptist Convention's 6 seminaries also have DEI infrastructures. New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary's website includes a document which charts policies regarding the inclusion of race and gender-based preferences in hiring faculty and awarding scholarships. The provost of the institution has asked the deans for the graduate program and level college to hire, quote, at least one minority adjunct professor per semester in addition to those already or the minority focused programs. In other words, bing,
You want a
bing.
single leg? What do you want?
Dude, I'll do whatever I want.
Just affirmative action. Get a takedown.
Like I've said, that is just too good to not keep repeating. And you know, what's interesting is that several years ago, I was actually at New Orleans Seminary. We did this apologetics conference there, and we're walking around, and I'm like looking at the TVs, and I'm looking at different things, and I saw this stuff like with my very own eyes. And I thought to myself, what is more racist than something that basically said minority only job fair that was being held on campus? Like, so if you're white, you can't go. Or if you don't buy into this, don't show up. And I was like, this is literally one of the most racist things I've ever seen. But remember, in pseudo reality land, anti-racism, or this idea that, you know, we would always call this reverse racism is actually racism. Well, it's not racism because we're looking for the undoing of disparaging groups, not just individuals, but of groups for the equality of access and blah, 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 blah. We all recognize what it is. You've gone, whoa, it's critical race theory in its fullest sense of the term. It's the dual consciousness or the heightened pseudo-reality consciousness of it. And I remember that we were talking to people about this, and we were actually scheduled. We had like agreed on a contract to have the International Society of Christian Apologetics back at the institution, and they canceled it. And they gave us, well, we got new leadership that's coming in, and we're not saying you can't come back in the future. When I know for a fact, like one of our planning committee guys was in a meeting, and they said that myself and our chosen plenary speaker, who was Tom Askell, and we were going to address the issue of critical race theory within the church. Well, of course, that's a heightened hot topic within the Southern Baptist Convention. They canceled us. They give us all this smoke and mirrors in another area, about all these other things, when the reality is that they canceled us. They told my conference coordinator that they wanted to pick the speakers and that myself and Tom Askell could not be given a plenary position at that conference that's on their campus. Now, they can do whatever they want with their campus. Frankly, my feelings aren't hurt. Like, I don't really care. You don't want me at your club. You don't want me at your little Southern Baptist good old boys, group. I don't really care. Like, keep playing your games in your own little ways. But I think the people that are listening to this would care. A Southern Baptist institution removed a guy with a PhD from a Southern Baptist seminary who taught at a Southern Baptist seminary, who was ordained in the Southern Baptist Convention, myself, was excluded, and Tom Askell. Why? Because we didn't go along with the DEI concepts. Remember, inclusion really means exclusion, boys and girls. So let's continue looking here. The Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary's webpage for its Kingdom Diversity Initiative. Remember, you add kingdom in front of it, it somehow makes it Jesus-loving, ideologies in that sense. Says that the school is, quote, committed to equipping groups, notice groups, who have been historically underrepresented on our campus to serve the church and fulfill the Great Commission. So now what they're doing is it's group concepts, not just individuals. And to do this, it's what it really means. Like, I've heard all their buzz languages. We want our school to look like the kingdom of heaven. Okay. Seems to look more like the Marxist kingdom of heaven, or, the Great Commission, all tribes, all tongues, all nations. Okay. Do you believe in the concepts of nations? Should I somehow have redistribution concepts or critical consciousness concepts or inclusion exclusion games that we're going to play? Is it about playing your linguistic pseudo-reality games and asking people to put that into their syllabi and to change their books and the like? But notice what it goes on to say. Financial aid resources, accordingly, represent part of a holistic effort to support current and future students in an attempt to make our campus look more like the kingdom. So unless you go along with it, so unless the kingdom of heaven looks like the kingdom of Marx, you're not really following the Bible. So notice it goes on to say this. One of the Kingdom Diversity Initiative's objectives is raising historically underrepresented or represented demographics on campus, such that 20% of the overall staff, faculty, and student populations are culturally diverse. While another one of the objectives is ensuring that 35% of the population is female. It is unclear whether Southeastern met these goals last year or not. In other words, we're going to direct a massive amount of money to raise people in critical consciousness. We're going to hire those people who have critical consciousness under representation of race and gender to fill our institutions. And then the inclusion exclusion concept, namely, we're going to be an inclusive campus, when the reality is, what have you done? You've excluded all of the people who have called this for what it really is. It's race Marxism. You're judging people according to the color of their skin and not the content of their character. We recognize explicitly what's going on here. Or in other words,
You want a single leg? What do you want?
Dude, I'll do whatever I want.
Just affirmative action. Get a takedown.
Man, that's never going to get old. Let's keep going here. The third institution, the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, has a webpage devoted to its position on diversity, though it is uncertain whether there are any policies or personnel dedicated to executing this position. I'm sure somebody might have been paid to say that one. We know Jarvis Williams, Matthew Hall, all of the others who have published books and given lectures about I'm a racist, I will always be a racist until the day I die. All the garbage that's been put out on it. We know that it's been going on there because remember, what did they just say earlier in the article? Some have it in boldface forms. This is what they're doing. And some don't even have it put on their websites. Why? So they can do critical race praxis without being critically race accountable from their boards. This is exactly what we've seen for quite a long time. Now notice this, it goes on to say this. Other entities within the Southern Baptist Convention, the nation's largest association of Protestant churches, advance the diversity, equity, and inclusion movement through programs and resources allocated. B&H, Broadman and Holman academic books, namely the publishing house of the Southern Baptist Convention, an imprint of the Southern Baptist Convention's media publishing and distribution division, Lifeway Christian Resources, the broader publishing house of it, advertised a scholarship opportunity with 2 slots, one reserved for female students and the other reserved for ethnic minority students, as previously reported by the Sentinel. And what they're going to do is they're going to give things like, oh, we want to send a minority to ETS and we're going to give them this money. It's the redistribution concept all over again. But notice this, the Southern Baptist Convention mentions diversity early in its about page on its website. Quote, Southern Baptists are as varied and diverse as the cities, towns, neighborhoods, and rural communities where they live. Each Southern Baptist church is autonomous and unique. Only when viewed together can one grasp the diversity that is the Southern Baptist Convention. So here's one interesting thing that a lot of people say. Oh, we're never going to have the issues of, this whole woke stuff in our church because we're an autonomous church. So you're really going to tell me that your little autonomous church isn't actually going to be infected by this? So let me give you an example. I know a guy who said this, and he has a church that's in North Carolina. But here's what's interesting is that one of the members of that church, the person's father, is a faculty member at one of these institutions here. And that person is, to say, for lack of better words, a McWokey. Woke as can be, like literally follows all of this stuff to the T. So are you going to really tell me that he probably hasn't tried to teach his daughter these things? Or are you going to tell me that if he showed up at your church to visit his daughter on the campus, parents' weekend or the football game, that you're not going to bring him in to possibly speak? Oh, it's rather you already have. And I've seen it on your websites. The reality is that it's very simple. It's very, very simple. Think about it in the broad sense of the Great Commission resurgence. We get our president who can then appoint the executive committee that are going to give us the boards of trustees that are then going to hire the presidents, that are going to hire the faculty. They're going to train the seminary professors or give us the faculty. They're going to train the pastors, and the pastors are going to go out in the church and see if we can fix the program. But why can't it also work like this? We have a bunch of moderate-esque, woke-friendly presidents. We get J.D. Greer, and I've actually said, and will say for a long time, that J.D. Greer's presidency actually marks the end of the conservative resurgence within the SBC. Because in that, he actually, and now as we look back, brought all of these initiatives into the convention. He gave us Resolution 9. He really doesn't believe what it says about women preachers within the seminaries and churches and all these different things. He gave us probably the most progressive executive committee that I've seen. They have worked to change trustee boards. We've seen how those have affected the seminary presidents. We've seen the hirings of the faculty. We've seen what it's doing to the students. So what's left in your long chain of we're not going to ever be affected? You just haven't hired them yet? You will not be excluded from this. So then it goes on to say this: the Southern Baptist Convention made headlines in June when messengers assembled at an annual meeting and voted to uphold a decision made earlier this year to remove Saddleback Church and several other churches from family cooperation with the denomination for having women pastors, which violates the denomination's statement of faith. Yeah, for now. So let's transition here. Let's bring up something else. And I have to do a little bit of reworking of this, so bear with me here. Some of these give me pre-times of it, some do not. There we go. We're going to just make it fit, drag it in. There we go. Now, part of this is that another name for this podcast could be like B-Team Video Editing. And I'm the head editor for the B-Team, not the A-Team. But it's just the world that we live in. Now, here's another funny thing, because I know that this can get a little long here. So one thing that I have here is I have this little Stream Deck here that allows me to give things like fun little quotes. So when you see Bill Roach is the B-Team, what you're probably thinking is,
Man, you are one pathetic loser.
and you're probably right, but here's my response to you.
Subtitle, zip it.
Exactly. Don't forget that. So what this is here is that this is an older video that came out 5 years ago is when it came out. And I've talked about this with quite a few people. And this is Walter Strickland, the diversity officer at Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary, and Carl Ellis with the Reformed Theological Seminary. And they're going to talk about, can minority Christians thrive in white evangelical spaces? And here's what I want you to look at. How they talk about diversity, how they talk about the initiated, how they talk about removing those who aren't of the initiated, and what this is going to do for hiring and firing policies and different things within the school. So we're going to break this down, and I'm just going to let them speak for themselves. And then we're going to give one more example after this of a true effect.
That's the first thing. The second thing is this, that the leaders in such contexts have got to realize that they are the visionaries. They may want diversity and all the rest of that.
They're the ones with the power. So if they want to bring this about, they're the ones with the power.
They have to understand that there are some people in that institution that are reactionaries. Okay, so
The not woke, who are the reactionaries, who are going to ask questions and say, why are we bringing this in?
you got the visionaries and the reactionaries. The visionaries will bring you in because they have, they want to see something. But the reactionaries will take you out. Okay, I've been through that on several occasions, I'm thinking, and the problem is that the visionaries don't know who the reactionaries are, because the visionaries are not of the group against which the reactionaries are reactionary. Does that make sense?
So basically what's going to happen is you're going to have a president that wants to bring in these initiatives, and you're going to have people who are not woke, and the way they're going to bring this about, that they're going to see this is that one of these faculty members is going to hold a thing like we're going to sit around and we're going to talk about the effects of lynching on your ministry. And when people react like this is crazy, they're going to get mad at that person and not the president. So now they can always say, well, I didn't really know. But what they're really doing here is that these little sessions are testing the waters of the initiated or those with critical consciousness, those who are living in the pseudo reality.
Can you tease that one out for us?
Yeah, right. The visionaries don't recognize the reactionaries, because the reactionaries are reacting against certain kind of people, of which the visionaries are not. Does that make sense?
Okay.
So they wouldn't notice that someone so-and-so is a bigot or whatever, because...
Why? Because when you hire a diversity officer, that's the person who's been trained in critical race theory. So like we said, when you bring somebody in, this is the person who we're going to hire who's trained in critical race theory. So they're speaking with authentic critical consciousness. So what are they immediately admitting at this point? That the person doing this is the person who has the critical consciousness. And maybe the person who's the president, well, they can't see it. Well, why can they not see it? Standpoint epistemology. From their perspective, they're blinded with maybe inherent whiteness and the power dynamics of it. So you have to listen to this diversity officer because they see it. And because they see it and you don't, you automatically have to listen to all of the things that they tell you to do to fix the racism. in order to bring about the equity concepts within the institution.
They're not of the group against which the biggest bigotry is directed.
Mm-hmm.
So they
And if you oppose them, notice, I know I'm stopping this a lot, you're a bigot. Just remember this. You raise any questions, you're a bigot. Love how that little linguistic power play works.
bring you in, and the reactionaries will take you out. And the problem is, generally speaking, the reactionaries have more power in the institution than the visionaries, because the reactionaries base their power on the status quo.
Okay.
The visionaries want to change the status quo, but the status
Namely, your inherent whiteness or your systemic whiteness or whatever power hegemony you have is the reason that you're there. And that's why the institutions were founded. And based off of this, you were given the job opportunities and you're given the protections from it. And because these minorities come in who don't have all of those things, they're inherently in a weaker position and they're not going to have the influence of power. When the funny thing is that it's so much of the inverse of this. Who are the people that typically have the most power within these institutions? It's these DEI officers. Why? They can tell you who to hire and fire. They can tell you if something's racist or not. They give you the policies for re-educating people or who to include, exclude from all the different things. These are linguistic manipulations. These are pseudo-realities.
status quo has its own. And so
Listen here. Listen to what's coming
happens
up.
is this. Either, that happens, the reactionaries will figure out a way to get you out, or the visionary will bring you in, and then the visionary will go somewhere else, and a new pharaoh will come to the throne. Who knows not Carl or whatever.
Yeah.
We're not to the point yet, but notice how that's a little bit of black liberation theology right there. We reinterpret Old Testament narratives according to our current critical consciousness situation. Just wait, it's coming up just now.
And so those are the dynamics we have to. The visionaries have got to understand that the reactionaries are there. So what they've got to do, they've got to really work hard, either to root out the reactionaries, or to get them to change them.
There it is. There it is, guys, in their own language, right there. Root them out or change them. Either make them critical race theorists or fire them. Like I said, that doesn't sound very inclusive, does it? That doesn't sound like a very inclusive environment, does it? Root them out? Root them out? I thought everybody was supposed to be represented at the table, but you want us to root them out if they don't buy into this? That's because by inclusion, they really mean exclusion. Who are they excluding? All the people who don't have critical consciousness. Plain and simple. It's as clear as day right there.
Change their minds, because if you don't do that, then it's gonna get real nasty,
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it's going to get nasty when you sit around calling people racist all the time for their inherent whiteness or because they didn't pick the right books on their syllabus or some kind of thing like that. It's funny how you call somebody a racist all the time and they start to get angry after a little while.
And so you can't. So even when a leader wants you there are some people, how in Romans 9, Paul says, not all who are descended from Israel are Israel.
Mm-hmm.
Well, not everybody who claims to be a Christian is a Christian. Okay? Not everybody who claims to believe the Bible believes the Bible.
So we'll finish with that little section there. Notice what's going on here with this.
You want a single leg? What do you
If you
want?
don't buy into this,
I'll do whatever I want.
and the way that
Just
they put
affirmative
it,
action.
you
Get a
may
take.
not be a Christian. Oh, that was just perfect timing. It had to be shown again. But notice this. If you don't buy into this, you may not be a Christian, but you don't believe the Bible. You might be not of the true Israel, they might say. It's funny how these things work. And I want to conclude with this. So recently, Mark Dever put out this video asking for people to come to the 9 Marks conference. And I was really kind of surprised because when I was going through, 9 Marks was a big deal. They packed that place out. And there was just sort of no ifs, ands, or buts. It was going to make, and it always made. And I was like, man, I wonder why this really isn't making. So if you know anything about sort of the issues that are going on, people started to ask things like, well, is it a financial issue? Is it an enrollment issue? And to some degree, I think it is an enrollment issue. I mean, Southeastern saw a 40% decrease or decline in student enrollment. So that's clearly a factor. I mean, literally when, if you have 10 people who are historically coming to a campus and now only 6 of them are coming, that's going to affect like how many people are in your classes and going to conferences and all of those other things. And then you started to see this whole issue where they ended up canceling the event and they took it to First Baptist Durham, and now it's for free. And the first thing that came to my mind was like, why would you do that? Like, that's just 20 minutes down the road. Like, what benefit are you getting doing that? Why can't you just do it here? I'm sure they've got a lot of their reasons and all this different stuff. But I was talking to a person, and that individual that I was speaking to, of whom we will leave unnamed because that's usually the best way to do it, started to say things like this. It could be a perfect trifecta of what's going on. It could be an issue of enrollment. It could be an issue of finances, even though they clearly refunded all the money and gave it back and all the rest. But it could also be this, and I think here's one of the key things to consider. Southern Baptists are also dealing with the issue of the law amendment. And within that is like, can women actually be preachers? And 9 Marks stood opposed to it, whereas the 9 Marks bought into the law amendment and opposed the idea of women preachers. That's what I meant to say. Whereas figures like, the infamous J.D. Greer, the eternal youth pastor, he was against the law amendment. And he's giving all these things, my soft complementarianism versus this complementarianism. Soft complementarianism is just another word. It's another linguistic manipulation for egalitarianism, whether they want to call it that or not. They are opposed to the law amendment. So here's probably another way of looking at it. One of the reasons that they were having such a hard time is that they've got a bunch of students who agree more with J.D. Greer than they do with Mark Dever. There are more people who want women pastors to some degree than those who are opposed to having women pastors in that. So you not only don't have enough students on the physical campus to fill it up, but the students that you do have on campus who, footnote, you've trained in critical race theory, who went to schools trained in critical theory and intersectional feminism and all the rest, are now present on your campus to some degree, some way, shape, or form, who don't want to show up to your conferences anymore. So what are the net effects of these things? The net effects are, well, decline enrollment, go woke, go broke. You're not going to have conferences that are going to function the same way, in no way, shape, or form. And you got to come up with all of these different ways to explain it. So in summary with this, what I want you to see is that Southern Baptists are just one example of many ways in which this movement has overtaken the visible church. But we as Christians can detach from this Gnostic heresy for what it really is and be grounded in reality, objective truths, absolute truths, the reality that the Bible is our objective standard, that we believe in propositional truth, that the great evangelical disaster of our age right now is the buying into so many of these things, that we have many theoretical inerrantists who deny their commitment to inerrancy through a bunch of woke hermeneutical hoop jumping. But we should not be dismayed. We as the church, we live as a church within the church, and we realize that Jesus Christ is still the Lord of his church, that the seminaries may come, the seminaries may go, but we can remain faithful unto the very end. So here's what you need to keep doing. Keep speaking out about it. When you see the manipulations, call out the manipulations, because usually what happens is you pop all the air in their balloon and it's just done for that instant. Doesn't mean that the whole thing is done, but you can just completely, utterly root it out. What you need to do is you need to see them playing the linguistic manipulations and call them out, show how they don't work on you, how you see exactly what they're doing. And from that, you need to start dealing with agreed upon definitions. Don't let them play this definitional game. Don't let them triangulate how we can't have objective meanings and all these different things like that. You as a church need to really stand strong upon these. You know, if you get a youth pastor that goes out there and it's like, systemic racism is 100% true. Well, guess what? You don't need to be the youth pastor anymore. Why? Because, well, you've bought into the critical consciousness, the pseudo reality. Like, welcome to the Gnostic cult. We're not going to play that game around here anymore. So watch where you're sending people to school. Watch the ways that you're training people up. Recognize the manipulations and don't fall for them.
You like me because of my sister.
Oh, I like you because you're honest. Because you're shorter than I am. You look like a before and after picture. Come on.